Hi, everyone.
Good
I'm
morning.
Rachel Dixon. I am a massage therapist and postural line therapist on Nantucket Island. And for the last 20 years, I have really worked on focusing with people with chronic pain and chronic stress, but mostly chronic pain. And when I was first a massage therapist, the massage corrected most people's issues. And in the last maybe 10 years, I found that it felt really great and it helped a lot of things, but it wasn't really the getting to the why of why people had issues. And in the past 20 years, significantly due to sitting more and using more devices, people's bodies have changed and they've gone from needing more mobility work to needing more stability work. So in my looking to correct people's whys, I found postural alignment therapy. So for years, I've been working on working with the nervous system, working with people's brains and how their brains work with their nervous system, working on unlocking different patterns of movement with people. And then I became certified with Egoscue, which is a postural alignment therapy. And really, for the most part, I still work on people with massage, and we add elements of the posture in. And I'm looking to, with my new posture room that I'm creating, be able to work with people more one-on-one in person with posture. And I work on them from their feet to their balance to their alignment, and with an intention of moving right, sort of aging well, and getting out of pain. So that is my background. Today's class is really for informational purposes only. I have created stuff or created exercises that would work with most people, but if it is not right for you, please don't do it. It should feel good, or it should not hurt. So if anything hurts, please know that it's not right for you, and just talk to your doctor. Also, my email address and my telephone number is on the class. You are welcome to reach out to me should you want to. So everyone should have gotten a PDF of the class from the class. And we're going to start with the very last page, which looks like this. I'm just going to change my light. It's right in my eyes. Okay. So I have switched from mostly working with Egoscue, which is just one level of work, to PTX. And they have additional postures. And the ones that we're going to go over today, Egoscue would have said that they were variations of the originals. And really, human beings look a certain way and we hold ourselves a certain way over all of time. But things that contribute to how our posture is any of the injuries that we've had over the years and how we've accommodated them. It's also going to be how we've used our bodies for many years. So the work we did, the way that we held our backpack, or we held our babies, or we hold our groceries, or if you're in a particular field of work, like say a carpenter, you have a dominant hand that is the one that is always hammering, but you have the other hand that tends to hold things steady all the time. So our posture is really a story of how we've lived our life. Why is that right or wrong? It's not. It's a wonderful story, and it is what it is. But bodies that aren't aligned properly and then moving properly from that aligned position tend to get injured, and they tend to have pain. So in the perfect world, we're still going to be able to do the activities that we do, but we're going to, at the end of the day or the beginning of the day, start our day out right by aligning our body, reminding our body how to move correctly, so we move through our day correctly and without pain. And or at the end of the day, to reverse some of the negative activity that we may have done, such as sitting a lot in a slumped position, working at a computer with our head in a forward position, or having a lot of repetition in one direction. We're going to introduce full range of motion so that we can put our bodies in an aligned position and we're less likely to feel pain, even if we had some diagnoses of, say, hip arthritis or knee arthritis or meniscus pain or things like that. Many people, even with some diagnoses like this, if they learn to move correctly or they learn to figure out what is going to make their bodies feel good, most people have significantly less pain than if they didn't do these things. So that's really the purpose in these exercises. So we're going to learn to recognize 3 different postures in PTX. They're postures 4, 5, and 6. These are not to put anyone in a box, but it's a little bit more. There's a reason why you've adopted these postures if they're what you have. And there's a way that you can work to fix it. And so that's what we're going to really be focusing on today. So the very last class, the page that we had, it's just from PTX. It's the 2 different, in Egoscue, they would have been variations. They're a variation of Swayback and then Scoliosis. So we're going to talk a little bit about those different postures. And as a review, the postures that we worked on last week were postures 1, 2, and 3. So postures 1, okay, this tends to be the football player, okay, but they're going to have an arch in the back. They're going to definitely have the arch in the back, okay. They're typically going to have feet that are pointing out. They're typically going to have tight shoulders with their arms here in the front, and their head tends to be a little bit forward, okay? Then we had posture 2 for PTX, which the big difference was they didn't have the anterior pelvis, which was that tilt right here. They had a posterior tilt. A lot of times, see how my knees bend with this one? A lot of times the knees will be bent, the hands will be here, but the head is a little bit more upright. Theoretically, the biggest difference between the 2 is the angle of the pelvis. Do you have an anterior pelvis? Do you have a posterior pelvis? The posterior pelvis is a pelvis tuck, okay? A lot of times you see this in a weaker posture or an older posture. But in today's society where people sit a lot and do backpacks, you're seeing a lot of younger kids with the posterior pelvis than we used to. And then we had the 3rd posture, which was the different rotations. So typically, you would have had an anterior pelvis, not a posterior pelvis, but you would have had, when you think of the different levels, you would have had a pelvis that was rotated a little this way, and maybe your shoulders were rotated this way, and then my head was rotated this way. So that one recognizes that you would have had either an anterior or posterior tilt, but you also would have had different rotations. Now, the last 2 postures plus the scoliosis, and scoliosis is tricky because it develops, you were either born with it, which is rare, or it develops over time because you moved unequally for left and right, typically at a time that you were growing very fast. So a lot of times it hits in puberty when you're having a very big growth spurt. And the ideal time to address it is right away, but it's never too late to address. There are some scoliosis that address better than others. But when you think of it hitting when kids are having a big growth spurt, the other time that a scoliosis becomes more apparent is as someone ages, because as someone ages, their discs tend to shrink a little bit, and whatever curvature they have in their spine becomes more accentuated, which is not ideal. So ideally, addressing scoliosis whenever it shows up is perfect, but the next perfect time is right now. So when I talk about, I'm just going to move my computer back a little bit. When we talk about what is a swayback, There's two that we're going to talk about today, but I'm going to show you what I mean by swayback. Now, in a lot of our classes, we talk about our center of gravity, and our center of gravity is really our pelvis. Now, in postural therapy, we want all of our joints stacked on top of each other, and this is a little bit more looking from the side. So we have our ankles, we have our knees over our ankles, we have our pelvis and our center of gravity over our ankles, then we have our shoulders over our pelvis, and then we have our head aligned over our shoulders. The other elements that we look at are all of our joints pointing forwards? So are our feet pointing forwards, or are our feet somewhat off to the side? Are our knees pointing forward, or are our knees knock-kneed or more pointing out to the side? Okay. Pelvis, you look at alignment so much, but our shoulders pointing forward is our head pointing forward, okay? And then, of course, we look at the rotations, what part of us are rotated. But very, very important, our pelvis is our center of gravity, and our center of gravity should be loading correctly over our feet. A lot of our foot problems come from center of gravity loading not through our joints, our ankles like we're supposed to, but shifting forward over, say, our feet. So I brought up that element quite a lot, but posture 5 is really that posture where our center of gravity, okay, instead of loading through our ankles, is going to shift forward. So see how instead of loading right here, I am going to load forward. I create more of an arch into my back. My upper back comes back. Therefore, my head is going to come forward. Typically, your feet are going to be out a little bit. I'll show you from the side. And this is a type of sway back, okay, because my back is swaying back, okay? But additionally, okay, we're going to be discussing ways to correct this, but theoretically, people end up having injuries in their discs right here, okay? But really, we end up getting issues in our hips as well because we're meant to be loading correctly and we're not. So this would be a little bit of what PTX would call posture 5. Then we have posture 4. And posture 4 has a little bit more of that pelvic tuck, okay? So theoretically, you might see it not so much with a bent knee, but for the most part, you can see the more I hyperextend, the more my back curves, the more that I bend my knees, it allows for my pelvic to tuck a little bit. So we have a flatter back, a more tucked pelvis, though it can be a little bit anterior. But what happens is this upper back part is quite tight, and my head tends to come forward and tend to look down, as opposed to looking up. But sometimes it will look up. So you have a flatter back, you have that more C back, and our head is looking a little bit more down. Arms tend to have to go in the front because they don't, not all of these things are stuck forward with our arms stuck back, okay? Then we have the scolioses, which do have rotations going on in them, but the rotations are a little bit less coming just from a rotation in the body and a little bit more that there is an S-curve in the back, okay? Like I said, there are some scolioses that can respond better or less, but even ones that are solidly there can improve with different exercises. And I really love that anyone would be able to address anything at any time. So the next thing we're going to go over today is going to be different simple exercises that if you had one of these postures would work for most people. And then we are also going to go over some very easy alternative mobility so they would be less the exercises and more mobility like foam rolling that would help the different postures. But before I get started, does anyone have any questions so far?
Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
Good
Yes.
morning. It's Joanne Lombardi.
Hi.
Hi. I do. On these different postures or dysfunctions, is it possible for someone to have a little bit of two or more or
Yes.
not? It
Yep.
is.
You absolutely can. So, like I said, in PTX, and it's just the way that they look at it, right?
Mhm.
So in PTX, they have the 6 postures, and they're incredibly common postures. Okay, but everyone has a variety of different things. So what people will tend to have a variety of is looking at the pelvis. You either have the anterior or the posterior pelvis, and then you have rotations or you don't have rotations, okay? And then you have where your center of gravity is or isn't according to being loaded. So everyone has a mixture of those 3 things, and it can be far more than these six varieties. But most people fit into 1 or 2 a little bit better. Now, in Egoscue, they tended to have types 1, 2, and 3, and you tended to be 2. You're just not going to have an anterior and posterior pelvis at the same time. So they would say, okay, you had a posterior pelvis and you had, these other things, or you had an anterior pelvis and you had these other things. The only thing that happens that when you put a label on yourself is it gives you an idea of where to go if you're not looking at each and every little piece. If you were to come to me as a therapist, we're going to get more specific and look at multiple levels of what you do. We're going to look at your foot. We're going to look at your alignment. We're going to look at your balance. We're going to look at your activities and your pain level. So there's just different ways of fitting into a box. Fitting into a box is both good and limiting. So, but for today's purpose, yes, you can have multiple, but the one thing you're just not going to have is you're not going to have both an anterior and a posterior pelvis. But anything
Okay,
else
that
will be a
makes
variety.
sense. Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
All right, excellent. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So next we're going to go over, first we're going to go over some exercises for a posture 4. Now posture 4 was that, oops, okay. So posture 4 was a little bit of a flatter back with that tight upper back with the head that tends to go forward and the shoulders that are often a little bit stuck, okay? Now, what's interesting, when I was coming up with the alternate therapies, is this posture is mostly a mobility issue, and an issue that their pelvis doesn't work in both anterior and posterior. So there's a lot of things for number 4 that we're going to work on when we go to foam rolling, more than the other ones, okay? So the 4, what we're going to work on with number 4 is aligning the pelvis over our ankles, activating our upper back. So our upper back is stiff and tight and curled under in a big C, right? So mostly we're stuck in flexion and we have a hard time getting, now take a look at my upper back, to get my upper back to extend, okay? It's a very small movement, but it's not subtle. It makes a big difference. A lot of people get stuck in the flexion, and we need to introduce extension into that upper back, okay? A lot of times too, because of this tight upper back, you're stuck in a pelvic tilt here, okay? But a lot of people have trouble activating your hip flexors, okay? So our hip flexors are right here in the front, and when they shorten, they're the ones that create that arch into our back. So a lot of times you're stuck right here with tight hamstrings, but your hip flexors aren't activating to create that arch. So what we're going to do with these exercises for the number 4, the person with the swayback that has the sort of posterior back, the curved back, the head a little bit forward, is to work on aligning over the pelvis, activating the upper back, and improving the arch in the back. So we're going to start with elbow curls. and with elbow curls. So everyone, all of these exercises are written out in the PDF that you got, okay? And if you have questions about them, you can find them. Most of them are also in Egoscue, where you can find them in, if you just search for them for videos, but I've written them out. So for the most part, we're going to create an active hand. We can come up against a wall, though it doesn't have to be against a wall, okay? We're going to have our feet pointing forwards, not out to the side. Our hips are going, our feet are going to be about hip width apart, okay? I'm going to take my hands and I'm going to create, they call it a golfer's grip, but it doesn't really matter if your hands like this or hands like this, okay? Oh, I can feel this is going to be good for me today. And we're going to hinge at the hands. So our elbows are going to come together. And then we're going to activate between our shoulder blades to open it up so it reaches against the wall. I'm going to press into the wall. And then I'm going to repeat. So it's not about my hand collapsing. It's about a solid movement of the elbow, okay? So we're going to come out here and open up. Then we're going to come here. And this really activates the muscles that allow that upper back to be upright. Now, none of this should cause pain. If you have significant issues with your rotator cuff, this may be too uncomfortable for you, and you would ease into these after you got better alignment of your shoulders. Now I can tell I'm a bit rotated today because as I'm coming back against my wall, I'm hitting at different speeds, at different times with my two sides, but that is going to, you can do it not against the wall, okay? But what's nice about the wall is it's also reminding you to be upright, because remember, that posture is a little bit more forward, and my brain and my eyes are recognizing that I'm straight right now, but I'm really not. So when I come up against a wall, it is reminding my body that I'm spending too much time in a curled over position. So the first exercise would be standing elbow curls, okay? Then we're gonna do sitting shoulder shrugs, okay? So for sitting shoulder shrugs, I'm going to sit in the middle of a chair, okay? I'm not sure if you can see me. Can you see how I'm slumped right like this? And then I'm gonna sit up on my sit bones, okay? So we're gonna have our knees about hip width apart. My feet are pointing forward. They're not sort of out like this, okay? You can start by slumping if you want, but then we're gonna sit up. Where now I'm sitting up. There's a little bit of an arch into my back. And we're going to squeeze our shoulder blades together. Okay, so see how that has activated my upper back. And then I'm just going to lift my arms up and down, okay, when they're squeezed back. So I'm not doing it up and down over here. I'm squeezing my shoulder blades together. And then I'm just going to like glide them up and down, up and down. And this is not only going to remind the back how to arch while I'm introducing the movement, but a lot of times those scapulas, those chicken wing bones in the back, they get stuck. And there is a whole movement that they're supposed to do. So this introduces that movement when we're already in an arched back. Next, we're going to do sitting floor. Now, this is a lot harder than it looks, okay? So sitting floor, we're going to sit down on the floor. I'm going to have my feet like hip width apart, my legs hip width apart, okay? I am just going to rest right here, okay? And I'm going to create I'm going to pull my feet up. See, my feet are relaxed right now. I'm going to pull my feet up and create a really active quad right here. Okay, so I'm contracting right here. I'm pulling up. I have a very active leg, okay? But because my butt is all the way back and my head is up against the wall, and then I'm resting here, this makes for a very active leg alignment. So you're going to hold this for about a minute. Ironically, today I'm not finding it as tough as other days. Okay, and then they have you do a squat, but the squat, they really want you to be squatting in alignment. So I'm going, and they want you to hold on to something. I didn't check to see how well this would work to squat, but I think it's going to work. So I'm going to stand with my feet hip width apart. I'm going to hold on to this, okay? I'm going to squat down. Yeah, this is not quite the right height. Let me come right here. So I have something right here that I'm holding on to, right? Just allows me to squat upright, okay? So now I'm going to squat down. I'm going to create the arch in my back, and I'm going to keep my body upright versus, see, I'm not even that upright. You can only go down as far as you can stay upright. And that would be a decent squat. Another thing that you could potentially do, I followed a routine that they had is air bench, okay? So air bench is also going to, you're up against the wall, hip width apart. I'm activating both of these. I'm pressing my low back into the back, and I'm activating both legs equally. Because a lot of people in that stuck up position, stuck over position, aren't activating their legs properly. All right, so those are the different exercises that we have for type 4. Type 4 is going to have a lot of alternative therapies that we work with different foam rolling, because type 4 is often an element where the hip flexors aren't working and it's a mobility issue, as opposed to posture 5, which we're going to go over in a second. Any questions on posture 4 before I go to posture 5? So posture 5. So posture.
Hello, Rachel.
Yes.
Hi. Getting back to the first one on that, the wall one with the curling elbows.
Yep.
Okay. When you're doing that, should your back remain with the little arch, or should it be pressing into the wall to really open up, your shoulders?
Well, it's not as much of a press. It's mostly that you want to be up against the wall. So if you are, right here, let's see. Let me see if I do it from the side, okay?
Okay.
So in theory, right, my heels are back, my butt is back, my upper back is back, but my lower back isn't. But it's not that I'm creating an arch or flattening. It's more that I want my upper back aligned, okay? And so then when I open up like this, I have this level that my brain is using, okay? So in the, your lower back isn't pressing into the wall. With that one, there's probably going to be an arch, but you're not creating the arch. You're mostly making sure that your heels, your butt, and your upper back are attached, like touching the wall, and then you're gonna open up like this. Okay?
Okay. So the little bit of the arch remains.
Yes, but you're not, it's a natural one. You're not making it more arched or less arched. You're just relaxing.
Okay, great. Because sometimes
most likely, if you actually had that posture, which most people are going to have a tighter upper rounded back, okay, no matter if you had type 4 or not. If you have that C back, you're just not going to have an arch. If you do have a big thoracic rotation with an anterior pelvis, you are going to have the arch there. But Most people's issue is really in too rounded and tight an upper back. So you don't have to worry so much about the lower back with that one. It's more about introducing the different movement, the extension movement into the upper back.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So posture 5, which is more of an element where that center of gravity shifts forward, okay? So you tend to have externally rotated legs, our pelvis shifts forward, people tend to have disc issues, okay? It is more of a stability issue. So most of our exercises to correct it are going to be here with the exercises that we do. It's not so much that something is tight, it's that we're not loading and using our muscles correctly. With a lot of people, it's even sort of energy efficient, like they're standing in line and they get to sink forward and their muscles don't work so much. Their joints do. As you shift forward, you put more pressure into that back, and our back gets a little bit, our back joints get wear and tear, but our muscles, like our big glutes, aren't holding us up. So we are sort of being lazy with our muscles and a little bit too hard on our joints. So it's not going to have as much of the foam rolling techniques that can help in this case. So I forgot to grab one thing. Here it is. Okay, so we're going to do abductor presses to start. So abduction, okay, is creating tension out, okay? Creating tension out. So I am going to take this band. You could take an elastic band if you want, but an elastic band is going to give you feedback, meaning it's going to move. And like this other one is not going to move. It's going to come to an end and it's going to stop. Okay, so for me, myself, and I want it to stop right now. So we're going to sit in the chair, sort of in the middle of the chair. Our knees are about hip width apart. Our toes are pointing forward. I'm going to start by slumping a little bit. Then I'm going to sit upright. I'm equally on both sit bones. As you can see, this is me slumped. This is me sitting upright. My eyes are generally forward, okay? And then I'm going to pull out against the resistance and release. Out against the resistance and release. If you ever wanted to, one could always do two things at the same time. You could always create a little activity in your upper back like this, and then squeeze and release with this one. Now I'm going to move my chair in just a second so you can see it from the other side.
This is a
So now when I sit right here, okay, if you want to, this isn't what they have, but I'm going to create a little activity up here. My knees are hip width apart. My toes are pointing forwards. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to squeeze out and release. Squeeze out and release. Squeeze out and release. And this is activating hip muscles. Okay. Then the activity they have is knee pillow squeezes standing at the wall. Let me just quick look. I forgot to grab one of my pillows. Here it is. Okay. So they are going to have you do knee pillow squeezes. So now I'm going to take my pillow. Okay, this is a rather square pillow, which is a bit soft. Okay, we're going to put it between my knees. I do like these square ones. You can get them at crookedhuman.com or PTX has them. Okay, now it's going to force me to be slightly more than hip width apart, but not by much. And my feet are pointing forwards. They're not pointing out. Okay, I'm going to stand at the wall. I'll show you from the side in a little bit. Okay. And then we're going to squeeze in, release, squeeze in, release, squeeze in, release. Now, one thing that you will have is one leg that is more powerful than the other one. So you might end up coming, like seeing yourself shift like this, if one leg was more powerful than the other. One thing that you do want, you don't have to squeeze and release with 100% of your power, but you do want to make sure that you start to equalize the pressure between the two. So you're looking to have the same amount of squeeze in, the same amount of release, the same amount of squeeze in, the same amount of release, okay? One thing that happens when you're standing up against a wall is it reminds you how to actually be upright, right? So if I wanted to add a little upper back activity, I could just put my hands up like this, okay? So now I'm squeezing, releasing equally from both sides, and I'm activating my upper back, which wasn't listed in there. I'm just telling you how you can adapt any of the posture movements to work for you. Now, let me show you from the side, okay? So now I'm gonna put this between my knees. I'm gonna have my feet pointing forwards. Relatively, my heels are against the wall. My butt is against the wall. My upper back is against the wall. And I'm gonna squeeze, release, and then I might as well make a little activity. Do two things at one time. And I'm going to squeeze and release up against the wall. Okay. Inline glute contractions. Inline glute contractions. So people who shift forward like this, okay, they're not activating their glutes, which is their biggest muscle on their entire back line, okay? And then they overuse they put their weight into their spine. So to activators you can always have something to hold on to, okay? But in fact, maybe I will today to get started. Normally we are standing like this, but now we're gonna have one foot behind the other, okay? And my back one, I'm going to squeeze this glute and release. Actually, you can probably squeeze both. Let me see what they say. Yeah. So now we're going to have one thumb part. We're going to squeeze both, but one is behind and one is slightly more forwards. So we're going to squeeze and release, squeeze and release. And once you've done it for a period of time on this side, we're going to change. So now we're going to have our other leg forward, and our feet are sort of touching like this, sort of in alignment, and we're going to squeeze and release. Now I can tell you I have more of an anterior pelvis on the right, and it felt more natural for me to have the other foot position because of this. So this is introducing a better range of motion for me. So now I'm squeezing both glutes together. And then they have people do downward dog. Now what ends up happening in downward dog, okay, I have trouble doing it. So I'm going to show you a couple of different ways that you can do, okay, but it's going to activate that upper back, make it work. And so we're going to start down here. I have my toes pushed under. I'm going to have active shoulders. This is also not going to work for someone with a lot of shoulder injuries. So I'm going to show you another way that you could do it, okay? And then I'm going to come up like this, okay? And I'm going to allow my feet to come as close to the ground while I'm pushing up away from the ground with my hands. So I'm actually getting better at this. I used to not even be this good. But this is one way that you can do it, but this would not work for someone with a shoulder injury. And also, if you're super, super tight in your calves, it's going to be challenging for that as well. So you can accomplish the same benefit by coming over to a chair of the appropriate height. And with this, we would want to make sure that we're not tucking our pelvis like this, that we're keeping our back arched a little bit. So now I'm going to come right here. Okay, I'm going to create, see how I'm like tilted in a tuck, and then I'm creating an arch, and I'm going to sink a little bit right here, and I'm going to let my head come, and I have a nice stretch in my back. I have the arch, and I have an extension, and we're coming right here. All right, let me make sure I've gone over all of those. Yes. Anyone have questions about the type 5 before we move on to type 6? So type 6 is a scoliosis. Now, many of these exercises would also benefit people who had different rotations. It doesn't necessarily have to be just for a scoliosis. A few of these exercises are a little bit more challenging if you have significant shoulder pain due to a shoulder injury. So again, only do these exercises if they feel okay to you, okay? But we're gonna start with kneeling counter stretch. You could also do standing against a wall counter stretch, okay? So the kneeling is going to add more of a stretch into your arms. I'll start showing you that, then I'll show you a different way that you can accommodate it. So with kneeling, okay, we're gonna come over on our knees, okay? I'm gonna have my hands up on a counter and I'm going to stretch back. But do you see how my head can almost shift underneath between my arms? That can be a little bit challenging. This is adding a lot of stretch into that upper back, a lot of stretch into that shoulders, but this is a deeper stretch. If this stretch is too much for you, and or it's hard to get down on your knees, okay, you can do it against the wall, okay? So now I'm up against the wall. I'm gonna create a little bit of that arch into my back, and I'm gonna stretch like this, but you could go like this. So see how the higher up my hands are, now my head is between my shoulders, okay? But if I had my hands more like this and I'm just stretching back, I'm getting a stretch into that back line, I'm getting a stretch into my shoulders, but my head is not working as far down. I'm still getting a good stretch into here. You could even be more on your counter like this, okay? So say you had a lot of shoulder injuries and you wanted to get that stretch. Now watch the difference between even this one. See how my arms are even below. I'm not sinking. I don't have enough space in my back line to sink deep enough here. But do you see how even when I come right here, I'm sinking with my shoulders back? Right here, if you have that injury into your rotator cuff, this might be more comfortable for you. Okay, hook, line, arm circles, arm scissors, I'm sorry. This is the first time I've done this one. This one is unique to PTX. So the hook lying position is any position where you're lying on the ground and my knees are bent. Okay, so anytime you see hook lying, that's what they mean. So now we're going to take an active hand and we're going to have sort of straight elbows, not bent elbows, okay? And we're going to alternate your hands in this position. A lot of times with the scoliosis, there is a curve in the back, but the curve is from side to side, and there's unequal tension, either from left to right and from front to back. A lot of times, it's going to be affecting the upper back. Okay, so that is arm scissors. Then they also have sitting floor. So sitting floor is We sit up against the wall. We have our legs about hip width apart. We're going to rest our hands in here. We're going to activate our quads and we're going to pull our toes up. So see, I have a really active, in fact, my heels are lifting up. So I'm working this and I'm working this. And I'm able to sort of press my upper back up against there. And I'm resting here. So lots of activity down here. Arms are just resting. Somewhat activity in my upper back, but a lot of activity into my leg. Okay, and then they finish with gravity drop. And I'm going to have to move my camera, and I actually have barefoot. You're supposed to do gravity drop with, let me just make sure that you can see my stairs. Yes, let me move this. Okay, so you can see my stairs, okay? You should be wearing sneakers with a non-slip bottom, okay, which I don't have. So I'm gonna come up to a stair. I'm on a bottom stair because if anything were to happen and I fall off, I want to fall off from the bottom stair, not the top stair, okay? I have a side thing that I can hold up, but I'm looking to keep my body upright, okay? So I'm gonna have my feet hip width apart, my toes pointing forward. I'm in a sneaker, okay? And I'm going to shift and allow a little bit of a stretch, okay? So I'm feeling a stretch into my calves, but because I don't have a solid bottom, okay, I'm able to shift and I'm going to have unrotations that go all the way up to my pelvis, okay? So you're even gonna feel your weight shift a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, and things are going to change a little bit because this exercise not only is a stretch for your back line, okay, but it's also going to be an element of a stretch where you get to unrotate your body along the way. Any questions on this before we go forwards? Okay, so if you don't have questions, using alternative 2 exercises for these postures. The posture 5, the one where your pelvis tends to shift forwards, okay? That is mostly a stability issue, which means that the exercises are going to be the primary thing, keeping your body aligned, keeping your glutes activated, keeping your center of gravity, your pelvis, over your ankles where they're designed to, are going to be the most important thing that you can do for that posture. Let me lift this up so you can see it a little bit better. So what happens with that type 5 posture though is they tend to load their foot improperly all the time. So a lot of the classes where I say, you know, your pelvis is loading your foot's going to have issues. You're going to have plantar fasciitis. Those need the stability exercises to bring your body back. So there's not as much mobility work that helps with them. Now, the posture 4, that C back with the head forward, there's a lot that we can do because what tends to happen with that type 4 person is, right, is they have the slightly posterior pelvis with the whole C back that's really, really stuck. So the muscles of the hip flexor and the muscles of the upper back aren't working. If the muscles of the hip flexors worked, that would pull this here. And if the muscles of the upper back worked, I'd come right here. This isn't such a bad position, okay? But what they get stuck in is this. So we need to learn to activate the hip flexors and we need to learn to activate the upper back, but their bones are also a little bit stuck. And they could use some introduction of movement into the joints. And so foam rolling tends to be very helpful for those different people. So I have a soft, squishy foam roller. This one's about 4 inches. 6 inches is often very good as well, okay? So different ways that you can get on it is, I'm gonna get on the very end right here, okay? Now, if you sit on with your tailbone right at the edge, and then bring yourself down, you should, everyone should fit on a foam roller. To create more stability, you can bring your feet wider, okay? You also, if you're beginning, can get a soft one that's a half foam roller. You're still gonna have a little bit of balance that you need to do, but it's not gonna be nearly as difficult. And then you can start by just resting your hands off to the side. Now, what's gonna happen with this, okay? That back is gonna relax in, the upper back is, and I'm gonna be getting a stretch across my pecs, which people with that seeker back have a real problem with, okay? If you wanna get more challenging, bring your legs in a little bit, okay? Once you've gotten that stretch into that upper back, you can do some pelvic tilts on the foam roller. And this is going to introduce, most people would flatten their back just fine. They have a little bit more trouble activating their hip flexors, and the movement should be coming from the hip flexors, not the back, okay? But activating the hip flexors to create a little bit of a pelvic tilt right here. And if you wanted to, and you can create stability by putting your hands right here, okay? You activate here, and then you create a little bit of a marching, which is just lifting one foot up at a time. And I can tell I need to work on it. I need to create a little bit more stability right here, but this is a core exercise. This is not, these exercises are not going to hurt anybody. These would be good for everybody, but it's especially helpful for that type 4 that doesn't use their pelvis properly and is a little too tight in the upper back. Now, because they are very tight into that upper back, now we take it and we go horizontally, okay? And I'm just going to foam roll to reduce tension in that upper back. Now, very important, I am doing it over where my rib cage is. I am not doing it into my lower back, okay? We want to do it where there's a rib cage, and it's a much more stable place to do it, okay? I'm also allowing the movement. I'm gonna go back and forth, okay? But I'm going to allow the movement. I am not arching my back. I am simply lifting up, and I'm going to kind of foam roll across my back while my back is a little bit straight. Do you see how my butt was on the ground? I've lifted it up a little bit, but I'm not arching the back. So I'm not arching like this so much. I'm moving like this, and I'm looking up at the ceiling. And this typically feels really good. Now, many people with their arms stuck forward also have a lot of tension in here, kind of where some of the shoulder muscles are. So you can come here along the side, and I'm not into my armpit, I'm on the side. I can alternate a little bit side to side. And I can alternate a little bit into here. And that's going to introduce some different movement into my arms, but it's going to open up that area so that when you can introduce it a little bit back. Now for scoliosis, anyone's curve, if they have those curves, are going to be unique to them. And so essentially what you want to do is, as much as possible, straighten the back. So if one area is shorter, work on lengthening that or softening the tissue. If one of the areas was too tight, you would want to sort of foam roll it. And then you want to kind of create equal from left to right, front to back. Any questions on the different ways that you could use a foam roller to introduce the different postural movements into your body as well?
Rachel, I've got a question about frequency
Yes.
on these different exercises. How frequently in the course of a week do you have to do them in order to get a benefit?
Most people do them every day. But if you were to do it even one time, it would be beneficial. So let me tell you a story. I hadn't seen my mother in, she'll hate it if the story goes out, but I hadn't seen my mother in almost a year. It was more like probably 8 months. She had COVID in January, and she spent a whole month sitting. Plus, she was a seamstress who had, had many years of leaning over her sewing machine. Then she sat for a month because she was so sick. So she kept saying that after COVID, she was having these shoulder issues. And I said, Mom, it wouldn't have been COVID, but I actually went to see her. It was only 20 minutes. We were both wearing masks, and I could see that the issue was how she sat for a month on top of, posture that was not ideal. And in the 15 minutes that was there, I made her get up. I made her move a little bit. I made her introduce some of the movements that were taking her from shifting to the side and shifting forward. I changed her chair. I added 15 minutes of exercises. She had been on an 8 out of 10 in pain, and she could not sleep at night without Advil. And do you know, she texted me the next morning and she'd had 0 pain, 0 Advil, and she could sleep on her side that night. Okay. Now that's not 100% typical, but it's very typical of someone who had a very quick kind of regression to see very quick progression. Now, did it last forever? No. I had to work with her on continuing the exercises and doing them correctly. And she's most likely going to continue to progress. But it took more than the 1 month to really get into the full position that she was. It was just the 1 month, regressed her the most. So you can see some changes right away. Now, what ends up happening is sometimes our body's postures will have some event, like with my mother's case, sitting the way she did when she was sick with COVID. That it kind of brings you to a less level. That stuff tends to clear up quickly. What ends up being your normal, I sit a lot, I sit this way, I do this one activity, there will end up being activities that kind of, if you sit this way, then at the end of the day, I need to do this or this or this to unwind your body, to introduce the different movements. You will tend to, at the end of a series of working with posture, come down to the couple of things that I'm going to do every day because it's going to make me feel better. So most people do end up doing it at least 3 times a week to possibly every day, but it's not a very long routine necessarily. In the ideal world, it will be a couple of minutes. Plus, you ideally want to learn to do things better, right? So if you're sitting at a desk, set yourself up so that the computer's at the right alignment, that you're sitting in a better chair. I also gave my mother a better chair to sit in, so she was sitting more properly when she was sitting, We were also building up her leg muscles because, so there's a little bit of starting your day out right, introducing, and it's going to be moving more correctly during the day. And then there's going to be, do I need to do anything at the end of the day to reverse the negatives that I had in my day? But most of us can introduce this stuff in an everyday way. It doesn't necessarily have to be that they put very specific time aside. But most people would benefit from at least a few of these exercises, the ones that are right for you every day. But if you even did it one time, it would benefit you as well.